Okay, so let's jump right in. We live our lives surrounded by invisible lines and rules, data that tells us what's ours, where our city begins, and where it ends. But what happens when that data is just wrong? Today, we're going to dig into a huge data dilemma that quietly shapes our cities and how one team found a way to fix it.
I want you to imagine this for a second. You buy a piece of land. You've got the official map, the deed, it says, this is all yours. But then, another equally official map from the city says, well, you can only build a house on this half and a store on that half. What do you do? And this isn't just some thought experiment. This is a real, chaotic problem happening in cities right now.
Researchers call this the two-map problem, and it's exactly what it sounds like. You've got two essential, official documents that are telling completely different stories about the very same piece of land. It's like you're trying to play a game, but you've been handed two different rule books. It's just chaos. So who are the two main characters in this story? Well, on one side, you have the cadastral map. You can think of this as the who map. It defines property lines, and it's the legal proof of who owns what. Then you have the zoning map. This is the what map. It tells you what you're actually allowed to do on that property. Can you build a house, a business, a park? In a perfect world, these two maps should fit together perfectly, like two puzzle pieces.
But, we don't live in a perfect world. And in many places, they don't align at all. A team of researchers looked at the city of Yogyakarta and Indonesia and found that these two critical maps were seriously out of sync. This was creating widespread confusion for pretty much everyone, from regular landowners to city planners. And listen, we're not talking about a few tiny mistakes or typos here and there. This was a full-blown city-wide data crisis. A huge chunk of the city was living with this problem.
Let's put a number on it, because it's pretty staggering. The research found that over 25%, that's more than a quarter, of all the land parcels in their study had conflicting rules. Think about that. 1 out of every 4 properties was caught in this confusing data crossfire. That is a massive level of uncertainty. So what does that actually look like for a person on the ground? Well, imagine your property is sitting right here, but the zoning map is just slightly off. Suddenly the rules say your land is both a commercial zone and a residential zone. So which one is it? Can you build a shop, an apartment building, maybe both? The truth is, nobody's really sure. So that begs the question, right? How in the world do you fix a problem this big and this messy? Well, to untangle it all, the researchers realized they needed a much, much better view from way up above. And that's where drones come into the picture. They use something called UAV imagery. Now, UAV just stands for Unmanned Aerial Vehicle, which is basically a fancy way of saying drone. These drones fly over the city and take thousands of ultra-high-resolution photos. When you stitch them all together, you get a perfectly accurate picture of what's actually on the ground. This becomes the source of truth, the correct map that everything else can be fixed against. So with this new, perfect picture, they came up with a really smart 3-step fix. First, they just used the drone imagery as the new correct base map. Simple enough. Second, they took those old fuzzy zoning boundaries and digitally snapped them into place, so they lined up perfectly with the real property lines. And third, for any properties that were still split, they created a clear rulebook to decide which zone should win out.
But, just lining up the maps, that's only part of it. The final challenge, and honestly the most clever part of this whole thing, was creating a fair and logical system for making those tough decisions when a property was still caught between two different zones.
They basically had to ask, okay, if one property still has 2 different rules attached to it, which one wins? You can't just flip a coin, you need a system. So they did exactly that. They created a priority list.
What they did was they built this logical hierarchy, kind of like a priority system. For example, let's say a piece of land sits right on a busy main road. Well, accessibility is key there, right? So the commercial zone gets priority and wins out. On the other hand, if a property even slightly overlaps with a protected environmental area, those regulations are the most strict, so the protected area zone always wins. It's a really smart way to bring order to the chaos.
So let's look at the results, because the difference is like night and day. Here's the before. This is that original messy zoning map.
You can literally see how the colored zones are just kind of smeared across the land. The lines are blurry and they have no respect for where the actual property lines are.
And here's the after. It's the brand new harmonized map. Look how clean and logical that is. The zoning boundaries now snap perfectly to the property lines. Every single property has one and only one clear zoning rule. All that chaos? Gone. But the amazing part is that the benefits went way beyond just cleaning up the zoning rules. The most incredible finding, the real shocker, was what this did for other city data. Get this. After they corrected the maps, the calculated area of the city's road network went up by 109%. Let that sink in for a second. The old maps were so bad, they were missing more than half of the city's actual roads. That's a mind-boggling error with huge consequences for things like funding and infrastructure. So you see, this is so much more than just a technical fix, right? This isn't just about drawing better lines on a map for city planners. This is about building a foundation for a fairer, more stable, and just a more functional society for everybody.
Because think about it, when your data is right, everything else just works better. You get fairer governance because everyone is finally playing by the same clear rules. Citizens know exactly what they can and can't do. That clarity creates a stable environment that actually encourages investment and allows for smarter, more sustainable development. And when you remove that kind of confusion from the system, you can even start to reduce economic inequality.
You know the maps that define our world, the ones that tell us what we own and what we can do? We never really think about them. They're invisible to us most of the time. But after seeing just how wrong they can be, it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? How confident are you that yours are right?